Chapter 3. Rats in the walls. The tape weighed heavy in Conrad's coat pocket as he hurried through the shadowy alleyways of New York. He didn't dare stop until he was miles away from the blue Vermin and its hive of criminals. Finally, he reached a quiet intersection, ducked into a secluded doorway, and took a breath, feeling the tension in his muscles begin to unwind. But as he pulled out the tape, a fresh realization struck him. He held in his hand a ticking bomb. The police precinct wouldn't be a safe place for something this volatile. Too many officers were tied to the city's murky underworld, either by bribes or blackmail. Conrad knew he couldn't trust just anyone with the contents of the Vermin list. As he examined the tape in his hand, his thoughts turned to Maggie. She'd be in her apartment by now, waiting for his call. She was the only one he could trust to help him with what came next. He slipped his phone out of his pocket and dialed her number. Conrad. Her voice sounded tense. Maggie, it's me, he said, keeping his voice low. I got it. The list. Or at least, the tape with the information. Are you serious? Maggie whispered. Conrad, that's huge. Meet me at Franklin's diner in 20 minutes. We need to figure out our next move. The diner was mostly empty, with a handful of night owls nursing coffee as jazz music played softly from a crackling speaker in the corner. Conrad slid into a booth, choosing a spot by the window where he could keep an eye on the door. Minutes later, Maggie walked in, looking sharp but wary. She sat across from him, her gaze immediately dropping to the cassette tape on the table between them. So that's it, she asked, keeping her voice low. He nodded. The only physical evidence of everything that's been hidden in this city for years. I didn't get a chance to listen yet, but from what I overheard, it's worse than we thought. Maggie's eyes darkened. You think it's real? Rats wouldn't go to these lengths for a bluff. And whatever's on here has already got him thinking he's untouchable. Conrad tapped the tape, his fingers drumming nervously. If we play this wrong, a lot of good people are going to get hurt. She nodded slowly, understanding. So what's the plan? We can't just release this. Even if we wanted to take it to the press, they'd have a field day, but so would every crooked cop and politician we're trying to bring down. Conrad sighed. That's the problem. We need more than just this tape. This is leverage, but if we don't have a plan, we're toast. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing on them. Maggie sipped her coffee, deep in thought, before speaking again. What about an ally outside the precinct? Someone with a clean record and no ties to the underworld? Conrad mulled this over, leaning back. There's one person. An assistant district attorney named Ben Lawson. He's been making waves trying to clean up the city. I've run into him a few times, and he seems straight. But getting him involved could put him in Rat's crosshairs. We're already in his crosshairs, Maggie pointed out grimly. If Lawson's as good as you say, he'll be ready for the risk. Conrad nodded. All right. I'll reach out to Lawson in the morning. But for now, we need to find somewhere safe to hide this. He picked up the tape, glancing around as if Rat's goons might appear out of thin air. We can't take this back to either of our places. Too easy for Rats to track us there. Maggie frowned, thinking, I might have a solution. My uncle has an old safe in the back room of his pawn shop. He's never around at night, and I have a key. If we stash it there, no one would think to look. Conrad exhaled, relieved. Perfect. We'll stash it tonight, and tomorrow I'll make contact with Lawson. Just as they were about to leave, the bell over the diner door jingled, and in walked a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar across his left cheek. Conrad's pulse spiked. He recognized him instantly. Dominic Vargas, one of Rat's most loyal enforcers. Vargas' eyes swept the room, and for a split second, they locked onto Conrad. Act natural, Conrad whispered, turning away slightly. We're being watched. Maggie stiffened but kept her expression neutral. Is he alone? Conrad glanced back subtly. Looks like it. But if he's here, Rats is already sniffing around for this tape. We need to get out of here, and fast. They slipped out of the booth, dropping a few bills on the table. As they walked past Vargas, Conrad kept his head down, hoping they could make it to the door without drawing attention. But just as they reached the exit, Vargas' voice stopped them cold. "Detective Decepto." Conrad turned slowly, meeting Vargas' gaze. "Vargas, didn't expect to see you here." Vargas smirked, his eyes gleaming with a dark amusement. "I could say the same, Detective. Strange time for a meeting with your partner." "We were just finishing up," Conrad replied, keeping his tone even. "But you know how it is. Cases don't sleep." "Or maybe you're working on something off the record," Vargas said, eyeing Conrad with a knowing look. His gaze flicked briefly to Maggie, then back to Conrad. "Johnny's been looking for you, you know. Says you've got something that belongs to him." Conrad tensed, keeping his expression impassive. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Vargas replied, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Johnny's very particular about his belongings, Detective. I wouldn't make him wait too long." Conrad managed a thin smile. "I'll keep that in mind." Vargas chuckled, leaning back in his seat. "See that you do. Wouldn't want any accidents." Conrad and Maggie turned and walked out of the diner, feeling Vargas' eyes burning into their backs. Outside, the air was cold and damp, but they moved quickly, hearts pounding as they slipped into the alley behind the diner. "That was close," Maggie muttered. "Too close." "Rat's nose," Conrad said, his mind racing. "We don't have much time before he sends more of his men after us." Maggie nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's move. The pawn shop's only a few blocks from here. We can stash the tape and regroup." The pawn shop was dark and empty, just as Maggie had promised. She led Conrad through the dusty aisles of old clocks, tarnished jewelry, and stacks of forgotten relics to a heavy safe in the back room. She unlocked it and opened the door with a creak, revealing an empty space inside. Conrad carefully placed the tape on the safe's bottom shelf and shut the door. "That should keep it safe for now. But we can't stay in one place for too long. If Rats has Vargas out looking, he'll have others too." They locked up the shop and slipped out into the night, each consumed by the magnitude of what they'd just hidden. The tape might be out of immediate reach, but the threat loomed closer with every passing minute. As they walked through the empty streets, Conrad turned to Maggie. "If we're going to stop Rats, we need to know exactly who he has on his payroll. We're going to have to dig into his network. Find out who his contacts are, where he keeps his cash flow coming in, anything we can use." Maggie nodded, her eyes hard with determination. "Agreed. And we'd better do it fast. If we don't, that list won't just ruin a few lives, it'll burn the entire city to the ground." As the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, they made their way back toward the heart of the city, knowing that with every second, they were closer to uncovering the twisted web of alliances, betrayals, and lies that was the Vermin list. Chapter 4. Digging deep. The morning light filtered through Conrad's blinds, casting long shadows across his apartment. Despite his exhaustion, he hadn't slept. His mind raced through every possible outcome, every risk, and every piece of leverage Rats could have up his sleeve. The cassette tape was safe at the pawn shop for now, but he knew it wouldn't be long before Rats connected the dots. Just as he was about to reach for his coffee, his phone buzzed. It was Maggie. "Conrad, it's me," she said, sounding breathless. "I did some digging last night, pulled some favors, and I think I found a lead." He sat up, instantly alert. "Tell me." "There's a lawyer named Alana Reyes who worked with Rats a few years ago. She was clean on the surface, but she had a strange pattern of cases, all of them related to Rats' network. Then she dropped off the radar, just up and vanished. Think she knows something?" "If she's not still on his payroll, she might. From what I gathered, she fell out with Rats, and if anyone can tell us where his cash flow is coming from, it's her." Maggie paused. "There's one problem. She's in hiding, and no one knows where she is." Conrad felt a glimmer of hope. If she's hiding, she might be willing to talk. Let's start with her last known connections. I'll meet you at the precinct in an hour. We can pull her case records and see who she interacted with last. Conrad's footsteps echoed through the sterile, buzzing halls of the precinct as he made his way toward Maggie's desk. She was hunched over a stack of files, squinting at what looked like a tangled web of connections. I pulled everything I could find on Reyes' past cases, she said as he approached. Turns out, a lot of her clients were small-time operators who disappeared after her services. I think they were pawns for Rat's bigger operations. Conrad flipped through the files, his eyes scanning for any connections to his ongoing cases. And her last known address? Lower East Side. She lived in a high-rise near the river until she vanished. I also found something strange. A few months before she disappeared, her accounts show several large cash withdrawals, but no trace of where that money went. Could be that she was buying her way out of Rat's grip. Or someone was squeezing her, Conrad muttered. Let's check out her old place. Maybe we'll find something Rat's missed. By the time they reached the apartment building on the Lower East Side, the city had begun to bustle with morning commuters. The building was old but well-maintained, an anonymous structure in a sea of identical buildings. They buzzed the landlord, flashing their badges to explain their visit, and he led them up to the 9th floor. Reyes lived here a few years ago, the landlord explained as he unlocked the door. Then, out of the blue, she tells me she's leaving. Paid off her rent in cash for 3 months ahead, and I haven't seen her since. Anyone unusual show up looking for her after she left? Conrad asked. The landlord thought for a moment, his face creased with the effort. There was one guy. Scar across his cheek, real tough-looking type. He came around once or twice asking questions, but when I told him she'd moved, he didn't come back. Conrad and Maggie exchanged a glance. Dominic Vargas. They were on the right track. Once inside, the apartment felt more like a ghost town than a living space. The landlord hadn't rented it out again, so Reyes' traces were faint but still present. A half-empty shelf, a dusty lamp, and a few scattered papers left on the counter. Maggie picked up one of the papers, her brows furrowing. Look at this, she said, handing it to Conrad. It was a list of names, dates, and what looked like payments, all marked with Reyes' initials in the corner. One name stood out among the others. Freddie Ortiz, Conrad murmured. He's one of the biggest money launderers in the city, been on our radar for years. Last I heard, he was operating under the radar, but if Reyes was representing him, that means she knew about his transactions. Exactly, Maggie said. And here's the kicker, Freddie's shop is just a few blocks away from here. If Reyes was laundering money for him, she might have used his place as a safe drop for information. Without wasting another second, they left the apartment and headed toward Freddie Ortiz's shop, an unassuming pawn shop wedged between 2 vacant storefronts. From the outside, it looked like a forgotten relic of the past, but Conrad knew that Freddie had built his reputation on being invisible and useful. The door creaked open as they entered. Behind the counter was Freddie himself, a wiry man with slicked-back hair and eyes that darted between Conrad and Maggie, assessing them like a hawk sizing up prey. Detectives, Freddie greeted them with a cautious smile. What can I do for New York's finest? We're here to talk about Alana Reyes, Conrad said, watching for any sign of recognition. Freddie's face stayed neutral, but his fingers tightened around a pen on the counter. Can't say I've heard that name in a while. Thought she'd left town. She may have, Maggie said, taking a step forward, but we think you helped her get out. And we think she left something here, maybe even something worth hiding. Freddie's gaze flickered, and he let out a dry chuckle. If I did, I'd have a price to pay. You know how it is. Conrad leaned in, lowering his voice. Listen, Freddie, you're smart enough to know that Rats is digging for this woman, too. You don't want to be in his line of fire any more than we do. If you help us find her, we'll make sure you're protected. Freddie's eyes darted between them again, his caution wrestling with the lure of self-preservation. Finally, he sighed. All right. She did leave something, a package in the back room. Said it was insurance, just in case things went south. They followed him through a door at the back of the shop, past rows of boxes and dusty merchandise, until they reached a small locked cabinet. Freddie opened it, revealing a sealed envelope and a small key. She said this key opens a locker at Grand Central. Whatever she stashed in there, I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing, it was enough to scare her out of the city. Conrad pocketed the key, feeling a fresh jolt of determination. Whatever Alana Reyes had hidden in that locker was probably the missing piece of the Vermin list puzzle, a breadcrumb leading directly to Rat's financial empire. As they left the shop, Maggie turned to him. You think she left it as a trail? If she did, we're following it, he replied. We'll check the locker tonight. If Rats is smart, he's already sniffing around her old haunts. We need to get there before he does. By nightfall, Conrad and Maggie found themselves in the bustle of Grand Central Station. Blending with the crowd, they made their way to the row of lockers, each one identical to the next. Conrad's hand shook slightly as he inserted the key into locker number 216. The lock clicked open, and inside was a plain brown envelope. He grabbed it and shut the locker, then motioned for Maggie to follow him to a quieter corner of the station. They tore open the envelope, revealing a USB drive and a letter. The letter was in Reyes' scrawled handwriting. To whoever finds this, I tried to leave, but you don't just walk away from people like Johnny Malone. This drive contains everything, the transfers, the bribes, the names. If I don't make it, I hope this finds someone who can end his reign. Conrad's eyes widened as he read it. This is it, Maggie. We have Rat's entire network on this drive. Maggie nodded, her expression grim. Then let's make sure we do this right. Lawson's expecting us tomorrow, he's our best shot at taking this to court. But as they turned to leave, Conrad felt a hand grip his shoulder. He turned, face to face with Vargas, his scarred face twisted into a smug grin. Leaving so soon, detective, he sneered. Johnny sends his regards. And he wants his tape back. Conrad's heart pounded as he reached for his weapon, but Vargas was faster, signaling two other men who stepped out of the shadows, blocking their escape. They were cornered. And if they didn't think fast, the evidence in their hands, along with their lives, would be lost to the underworld Rats ruled.